vivid memories of this place that don't ever go away. It takes me back every time I drive by this location, because I drive up and down at least 2-3 times a week. 30 years ago, I came here with Ken, my dad. My dad had sent me downstairs to go wait in the truck. Unfortunately, I had to go to the bathroom, and I lived as long as I could, and I finally decided to go upstairs. If I would have never had to go to the bathroom, I would have never walked back upstairs and never seen anything. This was the first time I had ever seen a dead body that was not in a casket. That's something that I can never get out of my head. Every time I go to sleep, I picture things along these lines.
So why'd you kill her?
I didn't.
Yes, you did, Ken. Again. As I told you before, evidence says you did.
I'll take me to court for it then.
The stuff he did was stuff that would give most people nightmares for the rest of their lives. There's lots of people that didn't believe me. Lots of people thought I was joking. And they waited way too long, and too many people got hurt after that. I wouldn't have believed the kid either. But they should have. I was born in Cleveland, given up for adoption. I was adopted at birth by my mom, Kathy. When I turned about 7 years old, she introduced me to the man she was planning to marry, and that was Ken. Not long after, we were sitting at the kitchen table, and I had heard some stories through church about Ken, and that he wasn't the greatest person.
Matt? Come sit down a minute.
My grandpa and my mom told me that Ken had went to prison. He had been convicted of a murder charge. I was told that he had ran away from home at 18 years old, and he had needed cash. Found somebody, robbed him. The robbery went bad, and the gentleman that was robbed lost his life.
It was a long time ago. He didn't mean to kill anyone. And he's sorry for what he did.
My grandpa said that Ken had made a bad choice, and that people make mistakes, and that's why it was okay to give him a second chance.
And we all have to learn how to forgive.
Ken served his time, 15 years. Just like anybody else, Ken deserves a second chance. And since he was out, then apparently other people thought he deserved a second chance as well.
Do you understand?
Yes.
So to me, being little for him to be out, then in my head he had done something to deserve to be out. There's lots of times I don't think Ken should have ever got out of prison the first time. If he wouldn't have got out of prison the first time, there would have been a lot of people that were saved. This was the kitchen table at the 7th Street home, and he was actually teaching me how to play 500 rummy. This was the kitchen table we were sitting when I first remember getting choked. One of the first positive memories I have of Ken was the card games. But it didn't take long after meeting my dad for me to start seeing other sides of him that not everybody saw. One afternoon, we were sitting down at the kitchen table, and he started to tell a story about getting into a fight in prison.
So the next thing you know, I have 3 guys have me cornered.
He had gotten jumped by 3 people and he used a broom handle to defend himself and killed those people while he was in prison. I laughed at him and thought it was kind of like, yeah, right. And then the next thing I know, I got a hand around my throat.
Are you calling me a liar?
He choked me and said, "Don't ever call me a liar." And I do remember hearing that over and over, "Don't call me a liar." My mom made him stop. And he never touched like that ever again.
God, what are you doing, Ken? Are you crazy?
He never laid his hands on me, but I've also made sure to never insinuate or call him a liar, whether I believed him or not. He liked to tell a lot of stories, and sometimes the stories became very wild. And I just, whether I believed the story, didn't believe the story, I never said I didn't believe him, because I knew how he would react if I called him a liar. He loved to teach me everything. I mean, he taught me how to hunt, trap, shoot guns. He taught me how to do plumbing, electric, construction. He taught me everything that he could possibly teach me. Ken always felt that hunting and trapping was important. He had built a trapping room on the side of our garage, and he hung the animals in the back. And this was the first time I had ever went actually with him to trap beaver. And this was one of the beavers that we brought back. Sometimes going in the room bothered me, seeing some of the animals just hanging there. There was always animals either hanging in there or caged in there. This photo was taken about a year after the incident with the possum. We were out trapping one day, and there was a very large possum that had its legs stuck in a trap. And he had his pistol.
He's still alive. Here, get this thing.
But instead of just shooting the animal that was in the trap that day, he decided to take his little wooden, he called it his beater, but it's just basically a little wooden club. He smacked the possum the first time, and he kind of laughed because it didn't die. He just continued to hit it over, and then he'd wait, and he'd do it again. And it would either move or twitch or try to stand up, and it would breathe, and he'd hit it again, and he'd back away again, and he'd laugh, and he's like, this thing won't die.
Look, he's fighting. He's fighting.
The entire time he was hitting the possum, he looked demented. His eyes were blank. He had a really weird smile on his face. I would say it was a sadistic smile. I've never seen him smile like that before. I'd seen him kill animals before, but that possum was just, I don't know. He looked like he was enjoying it. It had to be 5-10 minutes when it could have just been ended in a matter of seconds.
Let's go.
Once the possum was finally dead, he handed it to me and I had to carry it back to the truck.
Let's go.
It was upsetting. I've never seen him like that before, and I never understood it. But as I thought back about it, I thought, he had told me the story at the kitchen table about beating people with a broom handle, and then I saw him beat a possum with his little beater, as he called it. And that was the first time in my memory that I thought maybe that story was completely true. I started to believe his stories more after that one. Ken always had guns, but he wasn't allowed to own a gun, being that he was in prison and he was a felon. That's why he always had them hidden. Ken had guns hidden under a fish tank he made. He had an old vintage Coke machine that had guns hidden in it, guns under the bed, guns in his trucks. His favorite gun was a 9x18 9mm. That gun traveled with him everywhere. I remember the first time he cleaned his gun in front of me. He would wipe off each round as he put it in the clip. He would have gloves on, so his prints weren't on the bullets. He told me every time I touched a gun to make sure I wiped it off completely.
You never want to leave your prints on a weapon.
And I was fascinated because I was listening to him tell stories.
Even when you got gloves, you can't take that chance.
He started to tell me about his past and stuff that he had done. Being a problem solver was his words for it. In Ken's own words, a problem solver was a hitman.
And when people ask me to solve their problems, this is the one I use.
And he claimed to be a problem solver for a few families.
But there are rules.
There were many jobs that he claimed to have done, many situations that he's claimed to have solved. I can think of probably 15 stories, at least. If he said he had a problem to take care of, he would disappear. He'd be gone for a few days. He'd come back a little bit different. He'd be a little more closed off.
Now get out of here. I'll be back in a few weeks.
I had seen movies that have had hitmen, so I had the basic idea of what a hitman was. I remember back then when I was little, I wasn't 100% sure. As I got older, I completely believed that he did that. He was a killer. When I first met Ken, we used to go to garage sales all the time. If there was a garage sale, he'd stop, because he always wanted to see what he could find and make money. One afternoon, we stopped at a yard sale, and there was a drafting table, drawing table. I love to color, I love to draw.
Ken, check this out.
When I saw the drafting table, I wanted it more than anything. I begged for it.
Can I get it, please?
Let me ask the lady.
And I remember there was a lady that was there. He started to negotiate with her at that point for the table.
How much for that table?
That table there's 85.
He kept trying to get it, but he didn't want to pay her price.
I'll give you 40 for it.
His favorite thing was to negotiate. And he couldn't negotiate it.
Come on.
But, Ken,
I said let's go now.
When we went to leave, he was his word would have been livid that he couldn't get it for what he wanted it for. He kept saying, well, I'll get it. Or I'll get you one. Kept reassuring me that I'd get it. He was angry. We left the yard sale. He took me home, dropped me off, and he left me there. He left me at home for about an hour. He came back and picked me back up. And then we went back to the garage sale. The drafting table was already outside the garage, which wasn't where it was when we were there earlier. And he said that it was mine.
Wait here. I'm going to get the table.
There was nobody else at the garage sale. I did not see the woman at the garage sale any longer. I thought he went back, and I thought that maybe he went over there, negotiated, got it. I mean, he's persistent, so I didn't think anything of it.
Hurry up. Come help me. Hurry up.
The only change I noticed in Ken when we went back would be the fact that he was in a hurry. As soon as he came out of the garage, it was, it's time to go. We gotta go. Let's load it. And we didn't even strap it down, which we always strap stuff down. We load the drafting table up and we left. And I remember when he drove home a different way than we drove the first time. Within a matter of a couple days, the cops were at our door. And they're questioning him about somebody dying. Because somebody recognized the car at the house. The woman was dead. I didn't know who until later on. It might have been a couple years before I realized that the two were connected. Looking back now, I know he's the one that did it. And I know the cops know he did it. But the cops can't prove it. I was only at home, at the most an hour. And somewhere in that hour window, I believe she lost her life. I feel that me asking for the table is what cost her her life. And that's, that's something that I've lived with for, 30-some years? I want to say I'm sorry. I feel totally responsible. Totally. 100%. If I wouldn't have said it, then that wouldn't have happened. I don't think I've ever admitted that out loud. Ken always did odd jobs for everybody. He'd do everything from plumbing to work on bars, to do roofs, build garages, rip stuff down, move people. He often brought me along just to help him out. When I was 12, maybe 13 years old, Ken took me along to another job. This time we were helping a friend of his, Patty, move some furniture from one apartment to another. Ken was the maintenance man for that building. We'd taken some stuff up already, and Ken says, go ahead and wait in the car, I'll be down in a minute, and we'll get finished up.
This looks like the last of it.
I went down in the car and sat there. 5, maybe 10 minutes. I ended up having to go to the bathroom. So I got out of the truck, which I was told not to do. And I walked up the steps to the new apartment. I turned right to go in the door. I turned the door handle and I saw her laying there. I saw her bloody and naked. I knew she was dead, but I didn't know what had happened. Just seen her 10, 20 minutes earlier. I've tried to block this memory out as much as possible through the years, but I remember I screamed. I screamed and screamed. He put his hand over my mouth and he forced me down the steps. My feet were barely touching the steps as I was going down them. He got me out as fast as possible.
What's going on?
I kept asking what happened, and I was told there was an accident. That's all I was ever told.
You understand?
I was told to say I was never there. As soon as I got home, I told my mom. I don't think my mom believed it. I think my mom was blinded to everything going on. My mom still tells me to this day that if she realized what was going on, she would have stopped it a long time ago. I remember being told that I pretty much didn't see what I saw. The cops were there to talk to him that day. The cops asked me if I was there, and I was told to tell them no. If I would have said yes, maybe the cops would have found a way to question me, but all of a sudden it was dropped. I mean, they didn't question him anymore. Once again, there was no evidence. Between the police releasing him, between everybody telling me that, you didn't see it, you weren't there, I started to doubt what I saw. I'm like, well, did I really see that? And every time the cops do show up, they question him and let him go. I'm the one that was seeing it wrong. Rationalizing what I saw, I kept trying to tell myself that it was like maybe she fell, it was an accident. When she was getting out of the shower, she fell and got hurt and he laid her there. I doubted myself for a very long time. The yellowish tan brick building behind me is where Patricia was killed. She didn't deserve what Ken did to her. She was one of the nicest women that I've ever met. I was joking around with her on the first trip up the stairs. Everything seemed to be fine, and next time I walked up, she was just laying there. We came out the open door right there to the left of the electric meters, and we got into the vehicle right here in the middle of what would have been in the middle of the white brick building, and we left. I believe what happened had to have been quick. At least I hope it was quick. I hope that it wasn't drawn out, and I hope she lay there when he took me away and potentially suffered. I believe he strangled her, and I believe he cut her. But I was turned around so quickly. I mean, I have somewhat of a vision in my head of what I saw, but I was told for a long time that I didn't see what I saw. He just kept saying that there was an accident and we had to get out. I had just seen her, everything was fine moments before. Now you're naked in the middle of the floor. It's not an accident. Ken did a lot of home improvement jobs. He also installed security systems. And Ken had previously installed an alarm system on a home, and he told me I needed to come with him to help him fix a problem that they were having with his alarm. We showed up, and the woman that lived there was getting ready to make cookies. We were working on the alarm system. Ken seemed actually relatively happy. I mean, I didn't see any issues. I didn't see anything wrong. I was in the bedroom. He was in the living room, dining room area. And I heard a very loud pop, bang, very loud noise, like extremely loud. I was like, hey, Dad, what was that? I was like, you all right? And he answers back, but I knocked something over and I broke it. He's like, I'll tell you when we get outside.
Keep doing what you were doing.
He was like, stay there and I'll get done. He finished fishing the thing through the wall. We hooked the wire up and we finished the alarm system and we went to leave. I walked by the room and you could see into the living room. She was in the living room when we left on the couch, ice pack on her forehead.
Don't wake her.
I asked what was going on.
She's not feeling well. She's taking a nap.
He said the woman and went to lay down, he had helped her make an ice pack.
Here, take this.
He handed me it was his blue handkerchief that he always carried. He had me wipe off the door handle, the alarm panel, the inside and outside of the door as we carried everything out, which I thought was kind of weird. He was like, when you close the door, use Sheree. He's like, we don't want to leave dirt marks. He made sure I was the one that wiped it off, and I set the alarm, and I closed the door, and then we left. That was the weird part, was why would we set the alarm with her in the house? Within a matter of 2 days, I had heard it on the radio. I had heard she had died. I had heard she got shot. Apparently her husband came home and didn't realize that she was deceased at the time. Thought she was just laying on the couch with a headache, and it took him a while to realize that she was gone. Early the next day, once again the police were at our door. Then it started to click, and I started to realize, hey, something's going on. But once again, nobody believed me. I mentioned it to a therapist that I had. My therapist pretty much told me that I was exaggerating, that I didn't know what I was talking about, which seemed to always be every adult's answer. There's lots of people that didn't believe me. Lots of people thought I was joking. And I told my mom that I thought he did it, and she thought I was exaggerating. I also talked to Ken, and I asked him why this kept going on. And his response was, oh, it's just BS. Every time that there's a murder in Canton, they come to me. I'm freshly out of jail. And when he said that, I'm like, okay, well, maybe. I wanted to believe him. And I didn't want to think he was capable of something like that.
Are you okay? You got nothing to worry about.
Every few years, the cops were at my house. Every few years, he was accused of murdering somebody. Nothing ever happened. If they hadn't evidence, they would have arrested him, but they never arrested him. If the cops didn't think he did it, then why should I think he did it? Then I heard that the husband got questioned. People were saying, oh, it was the husband. I thought, well, maybe the husband came home and they got into a fight. So I, once again, tried to, in my head, brush it off. A few years after the last incident, Ken got into an altercation with a friend/business partner, and it wound him back up in prison for about 5 years. By the time Ken got out of prison, my life had changed a lot. Him and my mom were divorced. I was already planning on getting married. Before I met my wife, I had 2 children with a prior relationship. For years, I had been in a really nasty battle over custody of my 2 oldest children, and it really caused me a lot of stress, and Ken was aware of everything that it was causing me. At the wedding, right before we were married, my fiance Mindy came up to me.
You're not going to believe what your dad just said to me.
And said that Ken had offered to kill my baby's mom as a wedding gift.
Please tell me you're kidding.
She 100% thought he was joking, but I knew it was a real offer because I knew Ken's history, I knew Ken's path.
Babe, he wasn't serious.
Yes, he was.
I came to the realization that I believed he had killed the 3 women prior. When he made that offer at my wedding, pretty much confirmed everything I had ever thought. And I immediately looked at Mindy and said, I hope you told him no. She giggled and laughed, and she's like, why? He was just joking. I was like, no, he's not. He's dead serious. Please tell me you said no.
What did you tell him?
Of course I said no.
I had no doubt in my mind that if we would have said yes within 2 weeks, that would have been the end of my oldest kid's mom. This was my wedding to my wife. This was about 10 minutes prior to when he offered to, as a wedding present, to kill my ex. He was beyond dead serious. I'm glad my wife said no. But he made that offer here And hour and a half, 2 hours later, when the wedding's over, he's sitting downstairs sharing his plate of food with my youngest son. It shows exactly what I dealt with the entire time. One minute he would be the guy that was in this picture that made the offer. The next minute he would be one of the nicest people in the world that would give you his shirt off their back. When I saw him sitting there holding my son and feeding my son sausage with my son on his lap, I looked at him and said, there's still a chance to make him a decent person. And I tried, and I tried, and I tried. Fortunately, it didn't work. When I first heard about Linda Smith's death, it was from an article I read in the local newspaper. I had met Linda Smith numerous times. Ken had done odd home improvement jobs for one of her friends. She had been at our home to have many cookouts and parties that Ken had on our property. And the weekend prior to her death, she was at a cookout at our home. I had read that she was murdered, and I had read that it was a gruesome scene. And when I heard the description, somewhere inside of me, I knew it was him. He was just over there. The first time I got to talk to him, he was loading his truck out back. I asked Ken if he had heard about it.
I just heard about Linda.
He was like, yeah, I heard it. He was like, I'm pretty sure they'll be here to question me before long. But this time I wasn't a kid.
You going someplace?
Yeah, I'm going to a buddy's house for a few days. Waiting for this to blow over.
And I said, well, what do you want me to say if they come? Just tell them I'm out of town. You don't know where I am.
I gotta get going.
I had no doubt at all that it was him that had done it. And I wasn't lying for him. I wasn't going to say, no, I didn't know where you were. I wasn't going to say you were out of town. I know where you are. I'll say where you are. I couldn't not come forward. I reached out to the police department and said, hey, you need to look at Ken. And they had me come in and they questioned me.
So what makes you think your dad's the one who did this?
And I gave the police details of what I thought happened. She was either strangled with this or this, and I started describing details of the murder scene without ever being there.
You seem to know an awful lot. Sure you weren't there?
And they said that I knew some details that were there that I shouldn't know for being somebody that wasn't there. And they were like, well, how do you know these details? I said, because they match another one.
What other ones?
They had put me on to a lie detector test at that point in time. After a while, they realized that I wasn't lying.
Listen, if you're right, you could really help us out here.
And they asked if they thought I could get him to talk. They said, does he trust you? Will he talk about things in front of you? I was like, yes, he tells me stories all the time.
I'm supposed to see him this week.
That's when they had me wear a wire for the first time. It's 3:53, January 3rd. I'm going to Ferraro's to meet Ken Roth and have a conversation with him. I'm going to leave the recording on the whole way there, so it's already on and hidden. Every time I wore a wire, I was always conflicted. It was always a toss-up between the guy I wanted to put in jail and my dad. When they have you back in there again?
The other night, they called me at 8 o'clock in the evening and asked me all the same damn questions.
I went out of my way to try to get Ken to admit to stuff. I tried to get him to talk about Linda, and I tried to get him to talk about the three when I was growing up.
They think it might have been her husband, but they have no proof, no evidence, no nothing. Right now, they're at a dead end.
Oh, it's like they were all the other ones. I was trying to get anything and everything that the cops could use as leverage to get him to admit to murdering Linda.
The paper said she was strangled.
I never read the paper. I didn't even get to see it. He would have never thought that I would have been the one wearing a wire. Which is why I knew that if anybody was going to get him to admit anything, it was going to be me.
So it had to be somebody who either had keys for that house or knew her real well, because her keys were in the house with her. And yet nothing's missing, they said. All her rings, her jewelry, everything was still there. So it had to be somebody she knew. If they asked me if I knew who it was, said no.
The times I wore a wire, he always had his gun on his hip. Always. So every time that I was sitting there talking to him and he had his gun, I'd think, what would he do if he knew I was wearing it? And I knew he would have shot me. And that kept pushing me back to the reality of I need to get him to talk. That actually kept me focused on what I was supposed to do.
It's par for course. You know how they act. You know how it is.
Oh, yeah. Like I told them, I can play their dumb games as long as they keep playing.
That was one of the times I wore a wire to try to get him to admit to stuff. I was pushing the issue quite a bit more there than I normally would have. Because I was afraid he would hurt somebody else. I was afraid of what he would do to the next person, or how many next people there would have been. I kept fishing for a long time to see if I could get him to admit something. And I think that around that point in time is when he realized too that I was up to something. I have no way of knowing for a fact how he found out, but I believe that he found some way to realize that I was talking to the police. That's when I realized that he was even more dangerous than I thought he was. After I started speaking with the police, I noticed some strange things happening. A truck ran me and my son off of the road next to our home and put us into a ditch. Somebody came in our house and loosened plumbing under 3 different sinks at once, to the point that our house was filling with water. Next night, somebody went and opened all of our house windows. People started disconnecting our car batteries. Then stuff started coming up missing. Like a picture might be moved from one room to another, or a picture of all of us might be gone. Only one other person had a key to our house, and that was Ken. I started to realize that maybe it was a message to shut up. That night, we were all in the living room. We were just kind of hanging out like we always do, getting ready to watch some TV. All of a sudden, I noticed a light, a red dot, shows up on, like, my chest. It hit me right here.
What the hell is that?
And the light started to move on the wall and towards where my oldest son was. And before it could get to my oldest son, I yelled for Minnie to turn off the light and get down.
Shut off the lights.
I shoved my son to the floor. It wasn't one of those little pens like you shine through somebody's window. I've seen laser lights on weapons before, and it's exactly what it was. It was not a laser pointer. It was actually a laser sight off of a rifle or a pistol. And I know Ken had one on a rifle, and I know he had a laser sight on a pistol. I was so scared. I don't think I've ever been that scared personally in my life.
Go that way. Go. Stay down.
I believe it was Ken that was trying to scare me because I had information and I knew details that nobody else knew. And he knew that. He kept the lights off. I ended up moving everybody into a room that only had one window on it that faced the other direction. That was the night that we decided that we were going to get a U-Haul and leave. We were going to leave everything. I gave up everything. My whole life. My whole career. And moved into a basement for the next 2 years. We didn't tell anybody where we lived. We basically just hid. Got a call from a friend that told me that there was 20 to 30 cop cars surrounding the house, cops everywhere. Ken wound up getting arrested for a weapons charge to where a felon's not allowed to own a firearm. So they arrested him and he was given 2 years in prison. During that time, the investigation into the murder of Linda Smith had picked up. A new sheriff had taken over and was really pushing to make sure Ken did not get out of prison after the 2 years.
So let's go to the 2009 homicide, Linda Smith.
About a year later, he was charged with the murder of Linda Smith.
Tell me about your relationship with her, how you know her.
I did some work for her, put lights in for her, in her basement, GFI, and hauled some furniture for her.
I wasn't sure exactly what leverage they had, but I thought they finally got some leverage to do something.
So why'd you kill her?
I didn't.
Yes, you you did, Ken. Again, as I told you before, evidence says you did.
And take me to court for it then.
Me and my wife went to the trial every single day, and we sat right behind where Ken's seat was, next to the family of Linda Smith. But I was there to support the family, not Ken.
I just want to know why you did it.
I didn't.
You did.
So, believe what you want.
You were seen at her house, Ken.
I've been at her house quite a few times working.
It was weird hearing his voice after this long. He was never going to admit it. He'd never make it that easy. It angered me that nobody believed me, because if people wouldn't believe me and people wouldn't have listened to me over the years and all the times that I had came and told anybody, therapists, anybody, then she would have been alive. I actually did feel validated. I know that sounds selfish, but I had told people for many years what was going on. And I had so many people that I had been around and grew up around that messaged me and reached out to me on social media, in person, and said, hey, look, I'm sorry I never believed you. But half of me thought I did the right thing, and half of me was like, I just gave up my dad. Lost a lot of family because the family didn't want to admit he did it. I actually had a family member tell me that I should have been grateful and shut my mouth. Can't believe you ratted your dad out. I can't believe you're a snitch. Part of me was saddened because I knew that would be the last time I ever saw him in person. Once he went to prison, I never reached out again. I never attempted to talk to him. I debated writing him letters, but I never did. I wish I would have. I wish I would have wrote him and asked him why and seen if I could get him to tell me why he did what he did. Now that he's gone, I regret it even more because I'll never get the answers that I wanted. He was diagnosed with COVID. He ended up going into a coma, and while in a coma, his bowels burst and he died. I immediately got super depressed. I went in the bathroom and actually got in the shower and locked myself in the bathroom for a couple hours. I didn't want to come out. I didn't want to talk to nobody. I didn't want to look at nobody. I was already feeling guilty. I was the one that helped put him there, and I was the one that made him die alone. And that's the part that I felt guilty on. It wasn't the fact that he was spending the rest of his life in prison. It was the fact that he had to suffer and die alone. He deserved to live his life sentence out in prison. I don't think he deserved to die the way he did in prison. And that's something that I have to figure out how to deal with. I miss the dad that I grew up with. I miss the man that taught me how to shoot a gun and trap an animal, and as much as I love him for being my dad, part of me hates him for putting me through everything that he put me through. I don't think there's enough evidence and enough people remaining alive that were around at that point in time to solve any of those. The only way that the family of those three women will ever know is if they watch me say that I think he did it, and that I was there. That's why it's always been important for me to tell my story. I'd like some of the families to have some type of closure. He's never going to be convicted, but I can tell you he did it. And I'm sorry. I should have screamed louder. I should have said something. I did say stuff, but could have maybe done something different. And maybe me telling my story will also potentially lead to other things found, other connections made. I know there were other murders. Every story he told me couldn't have been a lie. I have no doubt in my mind that there's many, many more.
When I was little, I would try to intimidate my dad. He would be on the couch, and I would come up to him and I would flex my muscles like Superman, and I'd say, as stern as I could at 4 or 5, I'm made of steel. And he would laugh and punch me in the stomach and knock the wind out of me. I would lay there and gasp. He would taunt me. He would stand over me and repeat my words. Oh, you're made of steel, huh? What happened? What? I thought you were made of steel. And if I got back up and did it again, he would punch me again. As many times as I would stand there, he'd punch me in the gut and knock the wind out of me. What I remember is feeling so defeated that he hadn't backed down. I remember feeling like such a failure that my plan to intimidate him hadn't worked at all. I felt really helpless. The lasting effects of the trauma in my life wouldn't just go away. And so I just forced myself to do the things I needed to do to get here to tell the story. I was the only one who knew my dad's secrets. The stories are horrifying. He did monstrous things. It's so bad. This photo just makes me mad. Harley in the living room, he's got a goat in his lap, and he thought he was so tough. But he was just a jerk a lot of the time. When I was a kid, I'd look at this photo and he looked so intimidating to me. He's big and scary and could come at me at any minute. I look at it now and I think, you know, what a... And I was always hoping that he loved me and didn't want to hurt me, but he was a violent man. I always thought that, well, okay, yeah, I got hit today, but, you know, I'll do better tomorrow. I couldn't see the future, but I was always naive and optimistic. I was born in Humboldt County in the Redwoods in California on 80 acres of farmland and timberland with my mom and my dad. It's hard for me to remember happy memories with my dad because the scary times were so common and so much more intense. And one of them was when my dad put me in the oven. My memory starts all cramped up in the oven and the door opening. I don't remember getting put in the oven, but I clearly remember being in the oven, crouched up and cramped in there, and the door opening, and my dad being there, and my mom was just standing behind him watching. My mom knew better than to intervene in what my dad was doing. Get out. I remember being let out of the oven. My dad believed that children are to be seen and not heard, and he was very serious about it. Like, do I understand that I'm never to speak without being spoken to? Did you learn your lesson? He said, the next time you speak without being spoken to, I'm gonna turn it on. Don't do it again. And I remember that all so clearly. I was terrified, and I believed that he might cook me in the oven. Well, there's this phrase, I've brought you into this world and I'll take you out. And my dad told me often, and he believed it. When you don't learn to behave, I will get rid of you once and for all. if he chose to kill me because I wasn't obeying, that was his right, and he was going to do it. He was trying to rule me through fear.
Get out of here.
And I would go in my room and cry and vow to not be so evil anymore. I thought the problem was with me. As a little kid, I thought he was going to kill me. I believed I might die. So my dad read the Bible a lot, and he believed that if God didn't want him to do something, God wouldn't let him. My dad thought that women need to be beaten, and that was his job. I have this vague, troubling memory of being in my room and reading my books. And in those memories, I can hear her crying out.
How many times do I have to tell you?
I can hear the blows, just crashes and bangs. And I wanted to protect my mom.
Why did you make me do this?
So at some point, I had a knife, and I had gone to confront my dad and try to intimidate him with this knife. And things turned. He got very angry, and he took the knife from me, and I ran. I went under the dining room table, and my dad followed me and came right under the table with me. And there was this crazy intensity to him, and he was in my face, ordering me to open my mouth.
Open up! Now!
He stuck the knife in my mouth and told me to close my mouth. He was yelling at me something to the effect of, "You come at me with this knife, I'll slit your throat. I'll kill you."
No one is going to threaten me! You understand?
And I could feel the blade touching my tongue. And I remember feeling so afraid. When I think about it, like it's a shock inside my body just to remember how that felt. And I guess he just stopped. I don't know what happened next. But I do know that as an adult, I don't like to watch other people using kitchen knives. I have like an irrational fear. I don't know that I ever stood up to him again after that. Like, maybe not for a long time. But it was so real, you know? Just years and years after that, I didn't fight back anymore. I'd watched my dad kill my pets when he was angry, and I just learned not to get attached to things. If I had a dog that took a scrap off the table or peed on the rug one too many times, we would go outside and he would have me hold their collar while he shot them in the head. He would walk away and tell me to bury them, and I did that more times than I want to remember. We never had a dog that made it past like 2 or 3 years old. I don't know how I processed that. I didn't want to feel that pain, and I just learned to shut myself off inside. I spent a lot of time in my room when I was a kid. He had a lock on the outside of my door, and I would sit there and fantasize. I would go into these daydreams. On the opposite wall, kind of right next to my bed, there was a door, a tiny little door. And I would tell people in school how my dad had built this little door for me. It was very comforting to know that I had a door and I could leave if I wanted to. I believed it was true until about 10 years ago, I was talking with a friend and telling him stories, and he said, I don't understand why your dad would put a lock in the hallway on your door, but then also provide you a little door to the outside. Where did that door go? I couldn't answer. I didn't know what the other side of the door looked like. It hit me all at once that there was never a door, and that was part of my way of coping. I had imagined that that door was there. I think it was too hard to accept that I was trapped in that house with him, and I needed something. I needed some kind of fantasy, something to believe in, some way out. That was a big part of how I survived. My whole life, my dad was a commercial fisherman, and he had a boat. My mom worked with my dad on the fishing boat, and when they would leave to go on fishing trips, they would leave me with my grandparents. So one day, just before lunchtime, my grandparents were in the kitchen listening to the radio, and it was a report that the fishing vessel Female had capsized in the entrance to the harbor, and that the Coast Guard had pulled one person off of the boat, but it's believed that there's another one on board and they haven't been able to find them.
Let me call down there and see what's going on.
When I heard the radio report that one person had been recovered from the boat, I was immediately hoping that it was my mom. The next thing I remember is walking down a corridor in the Coast Guard. The officer opened the door. Sitting in a chair at a little table was my dad. And I felt this welling, like, oh my God, my mom's dead. But right away, I knew I needed to shove that down. I knew I couldn't express to him that I was so disappointed that it was him that made it. He started to tell me his version of what had happened that day. The initial story was that he and my mom were just out there in their boat, and a big wave flipped them upside down, and the water had washed through and trapped my mom inside and pushed him out. And I was 6, so I just believed he was my dad. And I said, come on, Dad, let's go home. So we went home. I rode home with my dad, and he didn't hug me or comfort me. We never talked about her or that her life was over. There's never been an investigation into any kind of wrongful death. My mom's death was ruled an accidental drowning. The boat was never recovered, her body was never recovered. And I do remember being completely preoccupied with the horror of she's gone and now I have to face him. The search continues for missing woman. According to a Coast Guard spokesman, one diver searched 90% of the Female and did not find the woman. The only section not searched was the boat's engine room, he said, indicating that it was not likely she would be inside. 30 years later, I was looking through old photo albums, and I had the newspaper clippings. One of these newspaper articles said that the engine room was locked. I read that, and it hit me how odd that seemed, because nobody locks their engine room. I told my grandmother right then, I think, I'd like to go down to the Coast Guard while I'm here in town and ask them, if they have any more information about what happened. And she dropped whatever was in her hands, and she looked so disturbed, and she said, "Oh, Sammy, you think he killed her, and now you're going to open all this up and create all this drama or this problem?" I hadn't said that I thought he killed her. I realized when she said that she thought he killed her, and had all this time just gone along with the story of the accident. That was the day that I realized I'd been lied to. I think my dad killed my mom because he found out that she had been saving up money to leave. And he didn't want her to leave, and he wanted that money. It was within 6 months or so. He had purchased a new boat with her money and named it the Claire Louise after her. about 10, my dad got married to his girlfriend. Her name was Nina. I liked her. They were happy together. But within a month of them getting married, things started to not be so great. So one day he had beaten her up really badly, and Nina must have reported this to the police because they came and picked my dad up in the middle of the night and arrested him. My grandparents would bring me up to visit my dad in jail. The bulk of every visit was him talking to me on the phone. And the only thing he wanted to talk about was his story that he wanted me to practice. His story was that he was innocently driving and she became irrational and angry and she grabbed the steering wheel and tried to wreck the truck and kill us. And he heroically maybe hit her once to try to save our lives, and she's blowing it out of proportion.
What are you gonna say?
He programmed me and drove it into me and made me repeat it back to him. I was expected to testify on his behalf that it was all Nina's fault and he was the innocent victim. I felt threatened. It's not like I had a choice. And he got found not guilty on all 6 counts. After he got found not guilty, it empowered him to be so brazen and so bold. He definitely went around bragging to people in town that he could get away with whatever he wanted, and nobody can stop him. So my dad would often tell me stuff I didn't need to hear. I was 15 and had my driver's permit, and I was supposed to be learning how to drive a car, but instead he had other lessons.
Had a lot of good times in here. Soon you will too.
Part of his idea of being a dad or training me to be a man was to tell me a lot of stories of women that he date raped. Women that he would get alone in his car, and then he would overpower them. He didn't call it that, because he was telling me, look, girls want you to do this stuff, and, they might say no, but you just, you can't be a sissy, you gotta, force them.
Give me your arm.
And he was showing me how to do it. So he said, so let's say you're sitting here, right? And you're my date. And he had me put my arm behind him. So he said, so see, I'm laying on that arm. So that arm, you can't even get to it. And he's like, so if you're making out with a girl and you get this far, you don't have to stop. You reach around behind them, hook your hand under their arm, and now you've got both of their arms trapped.
Try and move.
My other hand's free to unzip your pants and do whatever I want to do. And that's, pretty soon they get into it, so that's how you do it.
They all want it. So give it to them, right?
I wasn't interested in learning how to do that kind of thing, but he wanted to hear me be excited about raping women so it would prove that I wasn't gay.
I don't think I want to do it like that.
And he flipped out. He went on a rampage. He was going to beat the gay out of me. He would say, Sammy, you're never going to have a woman that loves you because you don't have the guts to hit them. And women need to be beat up and retrained.
You're just gonna let her walk right all over you?
And you're too much of a sissy to do it. I don't remember how that all ended up, but I got hit a lot that day. I would fantasize about escaping, but I didn't know how to make my own choices. So the world seemed scary, and so I never had the courage to leave. My dad spent a lot of time at the bars when I was a teenager, and Patty was one of the women who was often at the bar, and he would bring her out for an evening or a couple of nights. I liked Patty. She was nice. This one particular time, I was in my room, but I could hear him hitting her and her crying out in pain.
Sam!
He brought her out and showed me the bruises all over her. Her face was black and blue. Her arms were black and blue. And he said, I can't let her go, because if she goes to the police, then, that would be another trial and possible jail time.
What the hell am I supposed to do?
Just let me go home, please.
Shut up!
And she swore, no, I won't go to the police. And he said, well, I'm not going to take that chance, and, I don't believe you, so you're going to stay here until you heal. And I could see that she was frightened by that. Dad said, well, I've got to go check on the boat. What are we going to do with her? And he couldn't leave her there alone, and he couldn't bring her with us.
What about the old tree?
I didn't want him to entertain having to kill her, and so I came up with the stump as an option. There was an old-growth stump behind the house, a big redwood stump, like 8 or 10 feet tall, and 6 or 8 feet across at the top with a hollow center. And I went down in the hole and I put water in jugs so she'd have water to drink. And he let me take down a Ziploc bag of dog food so she'd have something to eat. And so I put that stuff down there with a blanket or two. It didn't seem that bad to me.
It'll be okay.
But I could tell that it was really, really frightening for Patty. She did not want to climb down in there. When I talk about the tree stump now, I see it on people's faces, that it's really scary, and it's alarming that to people that I would say, well, let's put her in this tree stump. But at the time, to me, it seemed like a great solution. She would be safe all day, and my dad would leave her alone. At that time, if I could have skipped spending the day with my dad and just spent the day in the bottom of a tree stump, I would have felt lucky. And so I convinced her, like, you just go down the ladder and you'll be safe here. And so she went down the ladder and we went into town. And we came back like 6 or 8 hours later and put the ladder back down in so she could climb out. We did that for like a month, almost every day, putting her in the stump, pulling the ladder out. And at the end of the day, we'd get her out and she would come in the house and make dinner and do the dishes, and he would take her in the bedroom and they'd have sex. And then the next morning, we'd walk her out to the stump until the one day that she tried to escape. So one day, my dad wanted me to get some chores done before we let Patty out for dinner. And so I brought the trash out from the kitchen, and I heard something in the bushes behind me. And there was Patty, dirt all over her hands and face. She had dug her way out of the stump. When she saw me, she said, "Please let me go. Please let me escape." And I felt so paranoid. Like, was this a test? And I can't tell if my dad's watching me right now to see what I do. I thought, if I try to help her right now, like, he's gonna see that as a complete betrayal. And all those times that he threatened to kill me, well, this would be the time when he would find it justified. All my life, I've regretted this, but I thought the safe thing for me was to call out to my dad.
Dad?
When I did that, she just sunk. And when he came out, I could see that he was surprised. He had no idea that she had gotten out. And I realized in that moment, like, oh my God, he hadn't even been watching. I could have said, yeah, go, run that way. I felt so ashamed and foolish. I had been too fearful and selfish. I let her down, and I let myself down, and he didn't want her in the stump after that.
Get inside.
We both stayed home, and she stayed in the house for the next 4 or 5 days. And then he said, well, I think her bruises are all healed up. And we drove her into town and dropped her off at the bar where they had met. Patty never went to the police. She told her friends there what had happened, and they didn't believe her. They thought it was just too crazy. In his own mind, it's reaffirmed that he can get away with whatever he wants. I was 16 years old when my dad met Sandy. I liked Sandy. She was really sweet. They seemed to be having, just a lovely time for a month or so.
I don't believe you.
And then all of a sudden, things changed, and he was suspicious of her and started beating her.
Trying to protect.
Over the course of about a month, the beatings continued, and she's covered with bruises. And then he's showing me, look at these bruises, I can't let her go. I didn't want her to have to go through what Patty went through. I didn't know what to do, but I thought I've got to do something. I've got to stop this. But I didn't know who I could tell. And within a day or two, she was dead. I came home, and my dad had Sandy sitting in a chair in the center of the house. He was waiting for me.
What's going on?
Look at her. And he was explaining to me that she wasn't going to get better. She wasn't responsive. And a lot of her skin was turning green. And he said something about, being out of options. And he said, go get the car.
I'll be right out.
I assumed he was going to kill her, and I didn't want to take part in that. But I thought, if I stand here in front of him and say, no, I won't get the car, what if he kills me too? So I went and got the car, and I pulled it around back, and he came out with her wrapped up in a blanket, and he told me to open the trunk. And he put her in the trunk. Then he closed it, and then he had me get a gas can and set it in the back seat. He drove down toward the woods, so we're kind of off the road. I couldn't figure out how to get out of this. I felt so defeated and so horrible, and I didn't know how to stop it. He lifted her out of the trunk, and he picked up this large pestle from a mortar and pestle set, and he said, look away. And so I turned and I looked away. And I heard like a thud. And I heard her exhaling, moaning. He killed her right then. He carried her into the woods, and he laid her in a ditch. We had a pile of used tires, and he put the tires on top of her and dumped the gasoline over it and lit her on fire. Jesus Christ. I'm just kind of hearing myself say all this. Like, I know what happened. I know the narrative, but like, God damn. I mean, I feel dirty. I feel just sick inside thinking about this. And like, of course I should have done something. And why didn't I do something? And, why didn't I stop it? We came back a few hours later. He had me crawl down in the ditch and check. I was poking around in the ashes and debris, and I uncovered part of her skull, but it wasn't burning anymore. There was nothing really left. I'm listening to myself, and I sound so disconnected emotionally from any of it. It seems surreal to me that I'm describing such horrific events.
Did you actually see her catch on fire and tires and everything burning?
Yeah, I lit her on fire.
Okay.
He had me pour the gas and had me light it. Wow. I don't really remember that now. I guess I must have, remembered more specifically then, but I just right at the end, I said I lit her on fire. And I don't remember exactly how that happened, but I guess, I would think in this moment, like, I was trying to be as factual as possible and as honest as possible, so that must be what happened. I must have, thrown something in there on fire to light the whole thing. I was standing there in the woods, like just feeling in shock. And he turns around and he looks at me and he says, "Well, there's no way you're keeping this a secret." And he just stared at me. He was just sure that I couldn't be trusted. And at that point, that day, driving away from Sandy's body on fire, I felt like there's no way he could let me live. I always had been afraid that my dad would kill me, but now I had, seen him kill someone. It was different now. I couldn't sleep in my bedroom anymore. He made me sleep on the couch in the living room. And one of the first nights, I woke up, in the middle of the night, and he had the light on. Dad? And he was fully dressed, and he had his boots on, and he had the rifle across his lap. And he said, "Go back to bed. I haven't decided what to do with you yet." It was hard for me to go back to sleep. I focused on trying to convince him that I wouldn't ever tell anybody. In those months that followed, I was so scared. Every day, I was at his mercy, like he was going to decide whether or not to kill me, and I felt like there was nothing I could really do about it. So, about a year after he killed Sandy, we were riding in the truck, and he told me that he had decided to kill me. He told me, "I'm going to take you down into the boat, and then I'm going to kill you." And I felt like everything inside of me was screaming, "Just run, just run." And I thought, what if I trip? What if I fall? And so I was afraid to run, and I just complied and walked with him. And I felt sicker and sicker as we got closer to the boat. I climbed on the boat, and he opened the door to the cabin and had me walk in front of him. And he had a knife in his hand. My heart's pounding and I'm sweating. He was telling me clearly what he was going to do. He was going to find out who I was talking to. And once he had the truth, he was going to kill me. "Who have you told?" He had all these questions, and he kept hitting me in the head when he didn't like my answers. This all went on for 6 hours in the bottom of his boat, and I was having trouble standing. I felt like I'm gonna die. And I decided in that moment, if I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die brave. So I looked right at him and I said, "Dad, I'm the only person who's here with you all the time. And I've submitted to you and I obey you. And if you don't think you can trust me, you can kill me right now if you want to, but I'm not answering any more questions." I'm done. It was the scariest thing to say, but I just stared at him when I said it. And the craziest thing happened. I watched all the anger and the fierceness just drain out of his face. He looked down and he just set the knife down. He wouldn't even look at me. He said, "Go upstairs, just go. Let's go back to the truck."
"Go outside."
He depended on his victims to be afraid and to feel helpless. That's what he exploited. So that was a huge turning point in our relationship. I started to see things differently and start to see that I had some power. We walked up to the truck and he drove me home in silence. I ended up living with him until I was 23. And it wasn't until I was getting ready to be married that I finally moved out. I moved across the country and I had my family, and I felt so free. I didn't think life could be so good. It was a great feeling. never spoke about Sandy. I never let myself think about her or what had happened. I blocked it. It wasn't until 2000, I was 29, I was having dreams and seeing her face. I would be walking through the house and I would think I saw her sitting in a chair in the living room. And I'd have to do a double take, and sometimes I was afraid to even check. My heart was just stopping. I had to force myself to back up and look. And of course I would look and there's nobody in the living room. But I knew who I was seeing. I kind of thought it might be haunted. It didn't occur to me that I really needed to face this. I needed to say her name. I needed to tell the story. And it still took me 10 years to come forward. So it was March of 2006. My grandmother called me to tell me that my dad had died. He had a lung disease and a series of strokes. I was immediately filled with a lot of sadness and regret, and I couldn't really put my finger on why. I had reasoned that, I hate him, and the sooner he dies, the better. But in that moment, I felt just this deep pain of loss. It was too late for me to be good enough to win his love. I gave his eulogy, and I didn't pretend like he was a righteous man, but I didn't really condemn him either. And I'll never forget, after the end of the eulogy, this little old woman came up to me, and then she smiled and she said, "It's almost like you were talking about a different person." And she gave me a little wink like that. So she knew what kind of man my dad really had been. And I began to realize, I don't really need to keep these secrets, maybe. It was kind of the first crack in that armor.
How long had you known this Sandy Turbin?
Probably a couple of months.
So, do you know when he murdered her?
After a few years of a lot of misery and a lot of work, I started to realize that I wanted to tell everyone what happened. I called the Humboldt County Sheriff that day and told them who I was and what I wanted to talk about.
He brought her out to the car and he had me open the trunk and he had her wrapped up in a blanket.
I showed the sheriff on a map where to find the stump that Patty had been held captive in, and circled on the map about where I thought Sandy's body was. They had been considering me as a possible suspect, but the office was overwhelmed with calls from people who had known my dad and knew me across the board. Every person that called knew that my dad was kind of a monster.
And this isn't the first time his name came up in a homicide. Anyone who's been around for a while knows your dad's history.
I still feel regret for not coming forward sooner. My father had passed away before he could be tried. But shortly after I came forward in 2009, I had a dream. I was in the house with my dad and Sandy, and I grabbed her and I started walking her toward the front door. And my dad was objecting, and I told him to shut up. And I opened the door and pushed her out and walked her down to the sidewalk and just told her, "Go, just get out of here." And then I woke up. I had never been able to help Sandy in real life, but I felt like I was able to help her in that dream. And I was able to set her free, and that's when I felt like I set myself free as well.